When you're going away, you can't do much damage yourself. A champion is supposed to make the fight, but try as he will, it's far beyond big threat. He's clever, knows how to handle himself, and in spite of his big size, he moves around quickly and thinks, so the little man won't get him. Challenge is Cloud, keeps on crowding. The instant he's in the open, he moves back again. Good luck rips in tirelessly and off. There's only one way for a champion to finish this day, and that's on his back.
Well, would you please take a Bible and turn to James chapter 4, verse 1. It's on page 979 if you're using one of our Bibles. James chapter 4, you should have received some notes when you came in today at either of our campuses. You're going to need those notes, and we'd love you to look at a Bible if you're able. So grab one that we have or use your tablet or your phone, however you can look at the scriptures today. We'd love you to look at a passage that I think is crucial in understanding conflict. We're doing this series called Fighting Fair, and the whole idea of the series is that we're all in relationships, and in those relationships we have conflict. And perhaps this past week God gave you an opportunity to be in some conflict to help apply what you're learning. I always know that when I preach on something, God's probably going to give me that opportunity. I just didn't think it would happen during the sermon. Let me just tell you what happened last week. So on this campus here at Irondequoit, and those at Greece don't see it happen, but we have music before, just like you do with a band, and then during the little video that comes before the sermon, the band clears and they bring out the stool and the table and the TV. And one of the things I love about my job is most of you don't have a job that you get to work with your kids, and I do. My children volunteer around here. And so whenever they volunteer, it's just an awesome thing for me. I have a daughter that sings on the worship team and another daughter that helps sometimes with bringing stuff on stage. So last week, during that little short 34-second video, one of my daughters is on the stage crew. She's helping bring something out, I don't know, but I follow out. And when I get into my position here, before the lights came up, I was holding my Bible and I just kind of smacked her in the rear end. Sometimes, maybe some of you see, I give her a fist bump or whatever. Well, she was turned her back to me, so I smacked her in the rear end. The problem was it wasn't my daughter. And maybe you noticed at the Greece camps, maybe here, if you thought, man, he just doesn't seem on his game for the first 2 minutes, all I could think is, number one, it's dark, and I couldn't tell who it was. I just knew it wasn't Emily. And I'm just thinking, who did I just hit in the rear end, and what does she think of me right now? So I'm trying to apply my sermon before I ever give it. And so as soon as the first sermon is over, I go backstage, and as soon as I saw who was back there, it was one of my daughter's friends. And I said, was it you I just hit in the rear end? She said, yeah. She said, Emily said you probably thought I was her. Oh, I did, yeah. So then that afternoon, I'm sitting in my office. I get an email from her dad. I should have shown it to you, but it just said, as I understand it, right before you preached, you hit my daughter in the rear end with your Bible, and then this is how I finished. There are so many things wrong with that. And I said, you're right. So anyway, this is hopefully you don't have that kind of conflict, but anyway, so it was, a little bit awkward to start the first service last week. This is just a sermon series on how to handle conflict and why we have conflict and what to do about it. And beyond different scriptures that we're going to work through together, there's 3 books that I read years ago that have been very helpful to me on this topic. I just want to introduce them to you. Ken Sande wrote a book, The Peacemaker, written in 1991, and it is the classic book on resolving conflict. And then Paul Tripp has written a lot of books. I recommend every book that Paul Tripp writes, and these are my 2 favorites of his. Relationships, a Mess Worth Making, and Instruments in the Redeemer's Hands. I think it's C.S. Lewis who said, don't tell me how many books you've read, tell me how many books you've read again. And these are all books that I've read at least twice. I think I've read these 2-3 times. Just great books. But let me just review last week. This was a 7-week series that I am pretty convinced that if you'll come and you'll work hard at taking notes and thinking through and applying, particularly through community groups. If you're in a community group, you're likely discussing this sermon series. This is going to impact your marriage. This is going to impact the relationship, a difficult relationship you have with a coworker or a neighbor or a friend or a family member. And so I just want to really invite you to lock into this 7-week series. If you miss a week for one reason or another, of course, it's online. It's usually online by the end of Sunday. So I'd love you to try to catch that. But really, let me just summarize for a couple minutes since we're only 1 week in. This is week number 2. Let me just kind of summarize last week for a couple of minutes. And the big idea of last week was this, that sinful people tend to respond sinfully when sinned against. Sinful people, that's all of us. Every single one of us is a sinner, and if we deny that, we have way bigger problems than conflict with each other. If we don't recognize we're sinners, we have a conflict with the God who made us. Sinful people, all of us, tend to respond sinfully. We respond in wrong ways, naturally and by default, when we're sinned against. And frankly, you could change this word sinned to something else. Sinful people tend to respond sinfully when hurt. Sinful people tend to respond sinfully when their expectations aren't met. The optional word here is the sinned against. It's not always when we're sinned against. It's just when things don't go our way. So we talked about how we have these default responses, and some of those responses are fight or flight, we talked about, or violence or silence, dig in or give in, blow up or clam up. And you have an automatic default response that you tend to have. And here, let me just clue you in on something, because some of you think, well, no, sometimes in this situation I do this, other times I silence, other times violence. Here's what you do with those you love most is probably your default response. People you don't know as well or people you're trying to impress, you might do something different, which, by the way, takes away the excuse that you can't change your default response because you're able to with those you want to. And there's these attack responses and there's the escape responses. And we talked about that last week. Denial, inward stewing, that's where you don't say anything, you just think about it a lot. And you have these pretend conversations and you always win them. Temporary flight, leave the room, leave for the weekend, walk out of the meeting. Permanent flight, get the divorce, quit the job, end the friendship, or the ultimate escape response, suicide. Then you have attack responses, manipulation, verbal assault, litigation, physical assault, and murder. All of these responses are default responses. We tend to think, obviously, these are wrong, and we tend to think these are okay. Socially, these are more acceptable than these. God would call them both sinful unless we do something here because we're headed towards solving the problem or we've truly forgiven someone in our hearts. But if we haven't, that means we're inward stewing, and that's wrong. Overall, to summarize it last week, we said this, that escape responses are used when someone is more interested in avoiding conflict than resolving it, and attack responses are used when someone is more interested in winning a fight than preserving a relationship. And all of us have a default on one of these. If you can figure out what your default is and be aware of it, it's going to help you a lot. Some of you are escape artists. When it comes to conflict, you manage to escape it. Doesn't mean you don't sin. You just handle it in this, there's this internal inferno inside of you that causes all kinds of problems for you and relationships around you. Others of you, when you look in the rearview mirror of your relationships, you realize you've run over quite a few people. So the 2 points we made last week about rethinking our reactions are these. Number 1, you have to recognize, first of all, then reject your natural response to conflict. Say, here's what I know I do, and next time I feel that, see, this adrenaline gets pumping in you, and you're no longer thinking, you're just reacting. So before you have time for that adrenaline to pump through you and you just automatically react, you have to think about how you're responding. What's my natural default reaction to conflict? And you have to choose to reject it. Secondly, you have to make it your priority to please God. Make it your goal when in conflict to please God. That has to be the priority goal. And the reality is you are responsible for your reactions. God holds you responsible for your reactions. And I know what they did to you, what they said to you, how they hurt you. You have expectations that are reasonable and they're not coming through. God still holds you responsible. And we are incredible masters at blame shifting and masters at justifying our behavior, masters at rationalizing our own behavior. Well, do you know what she did? You know what she said? She's not doing what she said she'd do. I was sick. I was hurt. I was tired. We come up with all kinds of excuses. And the reality is, if we want to improve our relationships, if we want to honor God in the way we handle people, it must start with rejecting our natural reaction to conflict and then choosing. Above what I want, I will choose to please God in this situation. And the reason we have to do that goes back to the whole point of last week, because sinful people tend to respond sinfully when sinned against. So that's last week. Let me move to this week that I hope grabs onto you and that you think about it through this week as God gives you some gifts of conflict this week. All right, so here's the goal today. The goal today is I simply want you to recognize the cause of every conflict in your life. I think by the end of today, I can help you see the cause of every conflict in your life. All of us have conflict. All of us. Whether it's small annoyances that we have or large-scale arguments, we have conflict. And the reason we have conflict is because sinful people tend to respond sinfully when sinned against. And if you're married, you have conflict. Do you know the only people who don't think that there's conflict in marriage? Single people. Yeah, they don't think, no, we're going to get along great. We'll never annoy each other, ever. Yeah, you're single. But even in the best of marriages, there's conflict, there's getting under each other's skin, there's slight annoyances, there's expectations that aren't met. And why does that happen? Well, there's a cause behind every single friction that you have in your life, whether it's major or minor. Maybe it's a minor conflict in your marriage of saying, listen, I've got this dirty clothes basket, and you seem to get close, but you can't quite get it in there. You played basketball in college, for goodness sake. It's a big basket. You can do this. And it just annoys you. It's right there, but it always seems to, it's around it. It's close by, but can't seem to get in. There's something about that that drives you crazy. You get up in the morning and you start the car to go, and it's the car you haven't used for 2 days, and you see not only is it almost empty, not only is the light on, but your car is talking to you, telling you, you better find a gas station now. And you think, didn't she know that it was almost empty? Those slight little annoyances, or maybe it's more severe than that. Maybe conflict is pretty normal in your household, and it's severe, and there's unkind words, and then raised voices, and it feels like an all-out war. You stop and think, how did this happen? We were best friends. How did this happen? Why did this happen? Is there any hope? Outside of your house, maybe it's in your cubicle, in the cubicle next to you at work. And there's that person who, man, he criticizes everything that you do. He seems to obstruct every progress that your team wants to make under the name of helping. You find yourself walking the long way around so you don't have to interact with him. You put in headphones so you can't hear his annoying laugh or his annoying voice or his annoying tapping on his keyboard because everything he does drives you crazy. Just feels like every meeting that he's in is just a waste of time. You dread being in meetings with him. Maybe it's your extended family, and getting together with extended family is tough. The air is thick with tension, and every time you just hope your husband doesn't say something stupid. You hope your wife doesn't say anything that gets your mom upset. And the tension is so thick. You don't know what to do. And with your in-laws, you get angry and you get bitter and you get resentful and you just dread being with them. See, there's conflict that's all around us all the time, whether it's a petty conflict of somebody squeezes the toothpaste tube the wrong way, to all-out wars that start with small irritabilities and just move to unreasonable conflict and yelling over, if you stop and think, it was the stupidest thing. And I want to try to tell you today, and it might sound crazy, but I want to tell you the cause of every conflict in your life, every single one. And I know that's a pretty big goal. And the answer is not sin. Well, we get that. But in the passage we're going to look today, there's a statement that tells us the cause of every conflict that we've ever had in our lives. I think it's the most brilliant thought that's ever been written on conflict and why we have it in relationships. So James chapter 4, look at the very first phrase. What causes fights and quarrels among you? Okay, stop there. He's asking the question, what causes fights and quarrels among you? And this is why I love the Bible. It is so practical, it's so straightforward, it's full of answers for life's problems. What causes fights and quarrels among you? James is about to say in one sentence what the root cause of every fight and quarrel is in our lives. Here it is. What causes fights and quarrels among you? Don't they come from your desires that battle within you? There it is. What causes fights and quarrels among you? Don't they come from your desires that battle within you? Then verse 2 begins, you desire, but you don't have. Now let's stop and just think about how brilliant this is right here. What causes fights and quarrels among you? Don't they come from your desires that battle within you? In other words, James says, you want this in every man's terms. What he's saying basically is, here's why you have fights and quarrels. Verse 2, because you want something and you don't get it. And when you don't get it, it turns into a battle. to a major or a minor degree, a battle within you, and it results in a battle with someone else. So here's the big concept for today that I long for you to get. It's this, that my biggest enemy in conflict is me. My biggest enemy in conflict is me, and your biggest enemy in conflict is you. You know the reason that you have the cause of every conflict you have? It's this, it's you. You have desires inside of you. And he tells us more about these desires. Your biggest battle, your biggest enemy when it comes to conflict, it isn't your neighbor who drives you crazy. It's not your spouse who does everything that he or she can to get under your skin. It's not your manager at work who's completely unreasonable. It is not your mother-in-law. The cause of every conflict inside of you is not your parents. The cause of every conflict that you have is you. And it's not your child, it's you. And if you think it's your child, it's because your child is so much like you. So let's think about this phrase a little bit. Your quarrels, your fights come from your desires that battle within you. That's brilliant. It's the opposite of what we say in conflict, right? Why did you do that? I did that because of what she said. I did that because of what he did. Here's better. If we don't want to point our fingers at other people, if you tend to be an escape artist, you rarely blame it on another person. You blame it on yourself, kind of. You say, I'm just really tired. It's an incredibly stressful day at work. You see, somehow making that statement, you think you have a pass now to respond sinfully. So we blame our environment or we blame other people. And typically we point fingers at opponents or at environments and say, that's why I sinned. That's why I did the wrong thing. And James says, no. You want to know what causes fights and quarrels among you? It's not because you didn't get enough sleep. It's not because your work is too stressful. And it's not because of what your husband said, what your wife did, what your neighbor did, how your manager is acting, how that coworker is being a jerk. What causes fights and quarrels among you is because you have desires that are going on within you. And those desires are at war with each other, is what he's saying. See, we feel justified when a person has repeatedly done something wrong, annoying, frustrating, or even downright sinful. And James won't let us off the hook that easy. James makes it really clear if someone has sinned against us, the real reason we're in a battle with them isn't because of their sin, it's because of a desire happening inside of us. What causes fights and quarrels among you? Don't they come from the desires that are happening within you? So what does that mean, the desires that battle within you? What it means is that each one of us have desires, have these constant desire battles that happen inside of us. We have good desires and we have bad desires. And those desires are constantly at war. So my explanation of what James is saying, you write this down in your notes, is this. We all have God-given desires. God-given desires. God-given desires. If it's God-given, is it a good or a bad thing? That's a good thing. The problem is this, that those desires can become evil desires. Some desires inside of you are good, some of them become evil. And James never says that desiring is bad. He never says that. What he says is that there's those desires battle within us, which means that not all the desires in your heart are bad. But our evil hearts, we're all sinners, and we take those good, healthy desires God has given, and we can turn them in bad, sinful, improper ways, improper wants, improper desires. Let me try to illustrate. The desire for sex, the desire for sexual satisfaction, the desire for sexual fulfillment, is that a good desire or a bad desire? You're afraid to answer. I can just feel it. It's a good desire. It's a great desire. It's a gift God has given. But if that good desire is handled in the wrong way, turned towards the wrong activity, the wrong timing before you're married, the wrong person, not your spouse, then that good desire becomes a bad one, right? Rest and relaxation. Man, I want to rest. I'm so tired. I just want to relax for a little bit. Is that a good or a bad desire? That's a great desire. God created you to need these times of rest and relaxation. He says if you come to me, he'll give you rest. Rest is a good thing. If that turns into laziness, that good desire becomes an evil desire. If that rest takes a higher priority than loving the people God has called you to love, then that desire has become an evil desire. What about the desire to control? Is that a good or bad desire? We tend to use that word almost always in a negative sense, but God created us to want to control. He said, fill the earth and subdue it, have dominion over the earth. That's a good thing. If that goes along with a desire to control people, to manipulate people, to make them do it your way, then that becomes quickly a bad desire. See, we want our way. What I'm telling you is this, that desires that are happening within you, this is not simple. There are constant battles and frictions and your motives. Jeremiah tells us we can't even read the motives of our own hearts. But we have good motives and we have bad motives, and those are constantly fighting within us, and they're lying to us. So we manage to lie to ourselves about why we do certain things. A desire for a good reputation or a reputation, is that a good or a bad desire? Well, Proverbs says that's good. That a good name is better than riches. But if to get that reputation, it consumes us and we become in public something we're not in private, then that desire has gone off the deep end. It's off the reservation. That's become an evil desire. And really, these are all idols. Do you know what an idol is? An idol is anyone or anything that takes the place of God in our life. You know you have an idol in your life when anyone or anything, you have a deeper desire for that than you do for pleasing God. That's when you know you have an idol in your life. John Calvin said that our hearts are idol factories. That's so true. Our hearts are factories creating idols. In fact, just this morning, I wrote down some typical, let me just give you a list of typical idols. You might not have time to write these down. You could try, or you could ask me for them. These are the 7 that came to my mind this morning. Very typical idols that we have in our life that take the place of God. Comfort, pleasure, control. Comfort, pleasure, control. Recognition, acceptance, power, or admiration. That's just a random list. I think those are 7 of the most common idols that I tend to see in myself and other people. Comfort, pleasure, control, recognition, acceptance, power, admiration. But it's an endless list. As John Calvin has said, our hearts are idol factories. So, how do you know if a desire that you have is a good desire or a bad desire? That's a tough question, right? So if there's these, what causes fights and quarrels among you, how do we know? How do we know if that desire I have is a good desire or a bad desire? If every desire we have is God-given but can become evil, how do we know? Let me try to give it to you through a situation that is made up, but it probably isn't very made up. It might sound familiar to you. How do you know if a desire has become an evil desire? Let's say that you are a mom who is extremely stressed. You've gone through weeks of high stress. You feel like all you do is referee your children. You feel like all you do is you're the behavior police. You feel like all you do is run around cleaning the house, picking up after your kids all day long. You feel like all you do is drive in your car, making appointments for everybody and getting them those appointments, helping with homework, arbitrating the latest argument. You just feel overwhelmed. And there is a Saturday down the road that you're free and you have the morning, so you make this big plan. You talk to your husband and say, I've got this plan. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go to breakfast with a great friend, and we're just going to talk. I'm going to take away the stress of the house, and you can watch the kids. I'm going to spend a couple hours at breakfast. Then we're going to go shopping for a while. Maybe we'll go to coffee. I'll be home around noon. I just get a morning to myself. Now, let me ask, is that a good or a bad desire? That's a great desire. Every woman saying, that's a great desire. Men are like, I'm not sure. I don't think it's real great, but I don't know. I'm sure something's wrong with it. That's a great desire. Now, so that Saturday morning comes. I mean, Friday night you went to bed. You were excited for Saturday morning. And your alarm goes off, and you wake up, and you can't believe it. Your husband's already in the shower. And your heart starts beating a little fast, thinking, he's getting up to make sure he's ready to handle the kids for the morning all by himself. He's an amazing man. And you go in, and you go into the bathroom, and you start brushing your teeth, and you say, wow, thanks for getting up already, honey. And he just says from the shower, he says, yeah, that project we were working on yesterday, we didn't finish. We got a presentation Monday morning, so we're all meeting at the office today at 8 o'clock to work on it. That desire that she had for rest and relaxation with a friend, good or bad desire? Good. How do we know it becomes bad? What she does next. That's how we know. How she handles that moment, how she responds. So let me suggest this. There's two ways, and these are in your notes, and I encourage you, you got to write these down because this is crucial to catch. There's two ways that you could know if your desires become an evil desire. Number one, if you're willing to sin to get what you want. That good, God-honoring desire inside of you has become an evil desire. Secondly, you know your desires become sinful when you sin because you didn't get what you wanted. That's how you know. And you might think, but wait a minute, I've been planning this for weeks. Are you saying that how I respond to this will say what role that desire has taken place in my life? Absolutely. And I'll know that that is an idol in your life, that has become an evil desire if you're willing to sin to get what you want, or you sin because you don't get what you want. And that's really the whole point of this passage. We do this all the time. So James chapter 4, let's think about that for a second. So James says, what causes these fights and quarrels among you? Don't they come from these desires that battle inside of you? So at that moment, you as a stay-at-home mom have this desire battling inside of you. You desire, but you don't have it. So if it doesn't come through, you want something, even a proper desire, but you don't get it. The question is, what happens next? What happens then? And then watch this. Watch what happens next. James says, so you kill. Well, that seems a little extreme, right? Keep reading. You covet, but you cannot get what you want. What does that mean? So James says, what causes fights and quarrels among you? Don't they come from the desires that battle within you? You want something but don't get it, so you kill. You covet, but you can't have what you want. Here's what I think he's saying. I think he's saying, what happens, he's asking the question, what happens when you don't get what you want? And maybe it's what we would call a minor or internal sin, like coveting. Or maybe it's an external sin or a major sin like murder. Thinking about, the escape responses, the attack responses. Maybe it's on the minor end of the internal responses of coveting. I wanted it and I didn't get it. Or it's on the major end of the attack responses of murder. Either way, whatever it is, it's wrong. And not only that, he says, you still didn't get what you wanted. What's James saying here? So we have a desire. That desire becomes an evil desire, so we sin because we didn't get it, and then we still don't get what we wanted. In other words, we often respond in sinful ways, and we still don't get what it was that we originally wanted. So what good was that response? We don't get something we want. We have this tendency to turn to sin to try to get what we want, or we sin because we don't get what we want. Maybe it's a little pouting, a little withdrawing from everyone. Does that help? Does that get us what we want? Not usually. And maybe because of bad parenting, maybe because of where manipulation was used, that your mom worked on you through manipulation, and you keep thinking that if you pout, you'll get what you want, or if you explode in anger, then everyone will be afraid of you and just do what you want, or you demand your way. Any sin like that, you try to get what you want. And then James says, sinning isn't the answer. So what is? Look at verse 2. You do not have because you do not ask God. Don't sin to get what you want. Pray. Talk to God about it. Then he adds one more thing. Don't think that praying alone will do it. Verse 3. When you ask, you do not receive because you ask with wrong motives that you may spend what you get on your pleasure or on your idols. If you're asking something from God that is fulfilling an idol in your life to get your way, God's probably not going to answer that request. That's what he's saying. So let's review these three verses. This is just in everyday terms. What causes fights and quarrels among you? It's about desires that are battling within you. You want something and you don't get it. So you sin as a result. In a major way, murder. In a minor way, coveting. And you still don't get it. So pray about your desires. And if they're good desires, God will give them to you. And if they're bad desires, he won't. If you had prayed for it and needed it, God would have given it to you. Instead, you've gone down this pathway, a sinful pathway, resulting in sin instead of a proper desire fulfilled. So let's go back to our real life situation. You're standing there in the bathroom and your husband says, I got to go to work. We have an 8 o'clock meeting. And you've been really looking forward to this moment, this time with this friend. It seems all good. And your husband announces he's going to the office and you have a choice right there. Is your desire sinful to relax with a friend? No. But if because you're not going to get what you wanted, you turn to sin, or you sin so you can get what you want, then you know that that desire had become an idol of your life, a sinful desire, because you were willing to use anger or bitterness or complaining or manipulation or the silent treatment or withdrawal, what that says, what that screams out is that has become an idol to you. And you've chosen to want your way over you, what you've chosen, what you say the desire of your heart is to please God. Now, what I want to say is don't think, okay, so anything bad that happens, I could just do nothing. Everybody's just going to walk all over me. No, I'm telling you, there are things you can do that we'll talk about in this series, but it's not anger, it's not ultimate frustration, it's not manipulation, it's not guilting, it's none of those things. There are other options other than bitterness and control and manipulation. And James is going to talk us through that. This series, we're going to talk through that. So you were looking forward to it. There's other options of how to handle it that we'll talk about. You can have a discussion. You could tell him remember our agreement. Here's what I was feeling. But here's the reality. You may not be able to have that time. And here's what I want to say, that please look at the bigger picture of what God's doing in your life in that moment. Don't sit there and think, I can't believe it. Now I didn't get to do what I wanted to do. Maybe God knew you needed to battle that desire that has taken an idolatrous place in your life. And that's the real stuff of life. That's the real hard things of life. How do you know if a desire has become an evil desire? You know if you are willing to sin to get what you want through manipulation or withdrawal, or you know it was an evil desire because you sinned when you didn't get what you wanted. All of us are sinners, and sinful people tend to respond sinfully when we're sinned against. And James lets us know that the biggest conflict that we have in our lives, the reason for conflict, is actually inside of us. So there ends up being this regression of desires that I want to talk about a little bit. I think Ken Sandy is the one that introduced this to me. This may help. This is in your notes. You'll probably talk about this a little bit in your community group. Let me tell you how this works. You have a desire. You want something. Again, it could be a God-given good desire, or it can be evil. We don't know. But we know it's evil if the next thing that happens, I desire something, that desire becomes a demand. I must have this. And we do this either internally or externally. I wrote some thoughts down like, I work hard all week. Don't I deserve a little peace and quiet when I get home? I just want the children to get along and work hard in school. Is that too much to ask? I deserve some appreciation and support for the long hours I work to take care of this family. Or they're my grandchildren. If I don't see them more, they'll think I don't love them. I've worked harder than anyone on this project. I better get that promotion. I take care of you. I clean this house. I manage this family. Give me a little respect. I deserve that. A desire that's good, it begins to become a demand. You see, the desire isn't bad. It's just that when we want it so much that it takes a priority over pleasing God, then it becomes a sinful desire, and it becomes a demand. If we're willing to sin to get it, or we sin because we didn't get it. And then the next step is, after I demand, I don't get it, then I judge. When people fail to satisfy my desires, my expectations, I criticize and condemn them in my heart. I may or may not do it externally, but I definitely feel superior, and I definitely feel like a victim at the same time. I judge. I feel like a victim, and I feel superior. And then that quickly moves to I punish. I'm going to find a way to punish you. You see, idols demand sacrifices. Idols always demand sacrifices. So someone or something has to be sacrificed. And if we're the judge and jury, we have a suggestion of what needs sacrificed. And it usually is to make clear that you did the wrong thing. And someone didn't meet my expectations, they didn't meet my demands, and so they have to suffer. And sometimes it's deliberate, sometimes it's not deliberate, but we find a way to hurt and punish people so they'll pay for not giving us what we want, what we expected, what was right, what was demanded. So how do we punish? Well, you could guess this. You probably know through your default response to conflict. Children pout and stomp and give dirty looks. They mutter under their breath down the hallway, and some adults do it too. Other adults, they use guilt, shame, manipulation, withdrawal, have a hurt look on their face, shut them out, treat them coldly. And as we mature in Christ, we got to recognize those responses we have. And we typically use the punishment, unless your default response is attack, we typically use harsh punishment responses with those we love the most. Idols are heavy taskmasters. And they want you to punish those who don't give in to your needs. Withdrawal, avoiding affection to spouse, acting sad, sending subtle cues, avoiding. And we do this so quickly. Desire, demand, judge, punish. Desire, demand, judge, punish. It happens all the time in major and minor ways. Let me give you an example in my own life. This happened a few summers ago. I was riding my bike on my day off, and typically I like to avoid busy roads, but there's a period of time I was on a busy road. 2 lanes one way, 2 lanes another. I'm in the far right lane where I should be. And I got hit by a car when I was a kid on a bicycle, so I'm pretty paranoid about people coming from behind me. That's how I got hit by a car when I was a kid. And so I'm always paying attention to what's behind me. And I saw a car coming up, and I saw he was switching lanes. So I feel this great sense of relief every time. That's when I get most nervous on a busy road and they're close. And so he's going around me. What I didn't know is when he moved into the left lane, he kind of cut off a guy that was coming up on his backside pretty quick. The guy that got cut off, instead of just hitting his brake and slowing down, he sped up and zoomed by him on the right-hand side, which is where I was, came very close to hitting me, and he communicated to the other driver he did not approve of his activities. And you could see it by the way, you could hear it by the way he sped up, and you could see he's turning to him yelling, and he's using a particular finger pointing, not towards him, but up, if you know what I mean. And it's just, there's a lot of anger there. Right? And so what did he do? Well, he had a desire to get to work and not to slow down, but he got slowed down, and that turned into, obviously, is it a desire to get to work on time? Is that evil? Of course not. Is it a desire not to have to slam on your brakes? An evil desire? Of course not. But it becomes evil if you sin because you don't get what you wanted. And that turned into a demand, and he judged that guy. Who knows why he thought that guy did it, but then he began to punish him, just verbally lashing out, trying to intimidate him, right? That happened pretty quickly. But here's another step. You see, this is a cycle because it moves on. Now, there I am riding my bike, and when he moved over to the right-hand side, he came so close to hitting me that instantly what we talked about last week happened, and that adrenaline pumped through me. And I was scared, and I was mad. And here's what's interesting. They both came to a stoplight about 200 yards ahead, and I found myself speeding up. And I caught up with him. So here's the car of the guy that moved out, the nice guy that moved out of the way but got in someone else's way. The guy next to him who's looking at him, sharing some information of what he thought of him, and I pull up next to him. And here's what I do. I'm not going to yell and scream. I'm not going to, use any hand signals. I just kind of look at him like this. And he looks back at me. And his look tells me, don't you even think about saying anything to me. And do you know what I was doing in my mind? I went from I desired to have a safe, nice time on my day off, and when it didn't happen, I quickly demanded that he knew what he did was wrong, and I judged him. I knew, there's a few things I know about that guy. Number one, he's a jerk. Number two, his wife was thrilled to have him leave the house, and he probably kicked the dog on the way out. I just knew that's what this guy did. And so I punished him. How? By just looking at him. I wasn't going to do anything. And then, it turned green and off everybody went. And it's good it turned green, and it's good I didn't say anything to him because if he got out of his car, he would have been in trouble. And I don't want to sound cocky, but he would have been in trouble. And here's why he would have been in trouble. Because he was a big guy. He would have killed me. He'd be in jail right now. So he's just lucky he didn't get out of that car. I rescued him from jail. And he didn't even thank me. But we do this all the time. We have a proper desire. And okay, so that's that situation. And you notice, I was doing something without even thinking about right or wrong, and all of a sudden this desire welled up in me, and it became a sinful response. And it was a chain reaction, and it happens for you too. So perhaps your wife is at home with the kids, and the kids are just not obeying. They're sinning against your wife, and your wife then sins in response, and she gets impatient and angry, and you walk in the door, and she has this look and scowl on her face, and she's unpleasant, and so they've sinned against her. Now she sins against them and against you and her attitude, and all of a sudden you jump into the game too. And all of us are ready to point fingers. Those kids, your response, why'd you come home like that? Well, you were angry when I came home. And we're expert finger pointers. And James just simply says, will you stop pointing fingers and look in the mirror? What causes fights and quarrels among you? It's desires that you have that battle within you. And when you want something and you don't get it, you sin in response. And James says you got to reject it. You have to reject it. This happens, and we hurt our marriages, we hurt our children, we hurt our people that we're trying to win to the gospel by our horrible attitudes. It hurts us at work, it hurts us with friendships, it hurts us with neighbors. It ruins holidays with family. Let me just give you some examples, and I want us to think through. At your work, maybe you take the same vacation time every single year. Your coworkers know it, but one particular year, you always take the week before school starts. You've done it for 20 years, and then one year you get your vacation request in a day late. No big deal. You've done it for 20 years. You go into your boss, and you find out one of your coworkers has claimed it because you missed your window. How are you going to respond? Is it a good desire to take this regular, traditional vacation time with your family? Of course it is. But how you respond will tell me whether your desires become a sinful desire or not. Are you going to treat him coldly, cruelly? Going to have a confrontation that just crosses the line? When he asks for computer help, are you going to say, no, I'm sorry, I don't have time? Let me talk to family members for a minute. Wives, moms in particular, you have a unique ability to set a tone in your home unlike anyone else. And if you're not careful, here's what I wrote. If you're not careful, you can pervert that gift and use it to create an irritable, unpleasant, uncomfortable atmosphere that tells your family either get in line with what I want or you will suffer. And that's where that well-known statement comes from. When mama ain't happy, ain't nobody happy. And that shouldn't happen in your house. Moms, wives, your mood, your actions affect the house like no one else, even your husband. Instead of relying on God to bring growth to family members, you depend on your tools of punishment. Husbands, you could do the same thing by being a thankless, critical, unhappy person. Your children, your spouse, so fearful of displeasing you, they fall in line, but it only gets what you want, and it damages the relationship because it desire, demand, judging, punishing. Children, same thing. You have incredible power in your family, power you don't even recognize. And single-handedly, teenagers especially, you can make your house a place nobody enjoys. When you don't get what you want, you decide consciously or unconsciously to punish your parents and siblings, and that's sin, and it shows you have serious idol issues of the heart. So here's the assignment. It's in your notes. Write this down. This is going to be easier to write down than do, but here's the assignment. Ask this question today. Certainly before you meet with your community group, ask this question of members of your family. Is there one thing I should stop doing or start doing to make our home more joyful and peaceful? Is there one thing? And this is why I say one thing. Please don't give me 10. It'll overwhelm me. You ask that question. Some of you have a spouse or a family member like, oh, I've got a list. Thank you for asking. No. Don't do that. Just give me one. 10 will overwhelm me. Can you give me one thing that I could stop doing or one thing I could start doing that would make our home more joyful and peaceful? And let me tell you this. The first person to ask this question, somebody needs to be gutsy enough to ask this question on the car ride home over lunch tonight before you go to bed. What's one? Please give me one thing. Don't say nothing. No, give me one thing. And listen, this is you ask this question. This is not, okay, your turn. Ask me. No. This is a voluntary question. But I'm telling you, ask it. What's one thing? One thing I could do. Now, I need to end quickly, and there's some questions on the bottom that I want to cover quickly. Here's the big picture. Your biggest enemy in conflict is you. That's the big picture. Let me give you 6 questions. If you ever counseled with one of our pastors or counseled with one of our volunteer counselors here at the church, you probably have seen these 6 questions before. If not, you need to learn these questions and learn to ask these questions. I got to cover them very briefly. I got some notes. Let me grab my notes here. Well, I don't have time to say all that. Let me just go through the questions. Number 1, situations. What is or was going on? What's the situation? Don't give me a chapter. Give me a sentence or 2. Write this. If you're struggling with conflict and you want to figure this out, start a journal. What is going on? What's the situation? Number 2, response. How did you respond? What did you do in that situation? Number 3, thoughts. What were you thinking? What were your thoughts? What is your fear that brought that reaction out of you? What were you thinking at that moment that brought that reaction? Then here's the big one. If you can understand what you were thinking, what did you really want? What was your motive? In other words, what I'm asking is, what's the idol of your heart that was competing for your ultimate allegiance to God at that moment? You see, whatever rules your heart controls your behavior. And this is a little side note. This is why I always feel sorry. We have a friend that does counseling at a public school, and I always feel sorry for them because they can't bring the God element into it. They can't bring the sin element into it. And because here's the reality, whatever controls our hearts is what controls our behavior. And every sinful struggle we have is an idol of our heart. So you got to ask over and over, what was going on? How did I respond? What was I thinking? What did I really want? You discover that idol. And the reason I encourage people to write this in a journal is you'll tend to discover some repeated patterns, and you will discover through doing this the primary idols of your life. Number 5, result. Did you get what you wanted? Here's what you're going to find out. You sin in response, and rarely do you get what you wanted. It's crazy, but we sin in response and we still don't get what we want. And then finally, hindsight, what should you have done? If you could do it differently, what should you have done? Here's the reality, and I'm going a little bit over, but I just need a couple more minutes. For 2 weeks, we focused on you and what is going on inside of you. And here's the reality. Every conflict you're involved in, you have to decide, are you going to choose to do what pleases God or what pleases me? We have a saying in our house that we learned somewhere, and it's only 2 choices on the shelf, pleasing God or pleasing self. That's it. And for 2 weeks, we focused on you. And what I want you to think about, we'll focus on the issues and the other person coming up, I promise. But God has a purpose in your conflict. You need conflict in your life. God's wanting to do something in your life through your conflict. And it's more than just, it requires way more than strategy or techniques. Please don't think that this series is about giving you strategies to handle conflict. We'll talk about that, but that's not enough. Techniques aren't enough. You see, we want to be free from pain. We want to be free from the hard work of conflict in our life. But you need a lot more. We need a lot more than effective communication techniques. We need a lot more than defining our roles. We need a lot more than realistic expectations. We need a lot more than conflict resolution techniques. We need more than just understanding personality types. All of that is just sin management. That's all of that is, managing our sinfulness. We need more than tweaking our behaviors. We need a change of hearts. So may God help you see through conflict the idols that you have in your life. And may this week, more than getting your way, may you stop long enough in conflict to say, what is going on inside of me? By God's grace, may you do it. God, thank you that you are committed to helping us look and act more like your son, Jesus. And I just pray that you would help us to do that this week as we face conflict and challenges in our life for your glory and our good. In the name of Jesus, I pray. Amen. On the way out today, you're going to be receiving a card, and that card, basically, it gives kind of the summary application of last week and this week. Last week on one side on what your default response is, and sinful people tend to respond sinfully when sinned against. And then this week it's just asking those 6 questions. And I want to encourage you to take one of those and think about where you should put it so that your eyes look at it at a place where the most conflict happens for you, or right before you get to the place. For some of you, you need to carry it in your car on your way to work. Some of you maybe need it at your workstation at work. Some of you need to maybe have it in your car for on the way home. Some of you need a bunch of these cards to put at a bunch of places, really. And we also, we've made some business-sized cards. Some of you like to carry it in your wallet, carry it in your pocket, and you'd want to. So these will be handed on the way out. If you want some of the business card size, just go to the information center. We have plenty. You can grab a few if you think it'll be helpful to you. But here's what I want you to know before you go. You have some lifelong habits of how to handle when you don't get your way. And you don't simply change that by one morning coming to church and saying, wow, that's probably not real good what I do. I should do it differently. Changing your default sinful responses doesn't come because you want to. It requires more than willpower. You need help. You need divine help. So let me just remind you before you go that we have a Savior who fought the ultimate conflict for us. He resisted temptation for you. He willingly took your sin upon himself for you. And he did it to rescue you from yourself. And he did it to rescue you from the penalty of sin and the power of sin so that you don't have to do sinful responses anymore. But it doesn't come by willpower. It comes by his grace. So, you can change your response by his help through his grace. So this week, may God give you the grace to clearly see ways you tend to respond in ways that don't please him. And by his grace, may he give you the power to choose differently for his glory and for your good and the good of those you love most. Now may the Lord bless you and keep you, make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord turn his face toward you and give you peace. God bless you. We'll see you next week.